Hi, everyone. Thank you for watching the film How to Draw a Bunny with us and being lively in the chat. Saul and Stephanie and I are back, and we'd like to chat a little bit more. And my first question is for you, Saul. And what was it like being a practicing artist in the late 60s and 70s in New York and corresponding with Ray?
Two different things. Ray was part of the 60s and 70s. Being a practicing artist in New York at the time, as I was saying when we during the screening of the film, at the time in the 60s and 70s, the New York art world was about 500 people, so you could know 2/3 of the New York art world just by going to bars and to parties. So it was a much smaller thing. It was less commercial. Everybody had a second job or a first job in which art was their second job. You religiously went to the galleries because you never knew what was going to be shown, and things were constantly shifting. So literally, within a 3-4 year period, you could go through multiple sort of mini movements. Things were being named and artists were being categorized and ordered, and there'd be 2 or 3 shows of that art, of that type of art, and that would be over and you'd be on to the next thing, right? You read the art magazines religiously because that gave you access to stuff in Europe and on the West Coast. And you tried to make the most provocative and most interesting work you could. And every conversation was critical. In that very, very few people held back in terms of what they actually thought about anything. That came in the 80s and 90s when people didn't want to go on record for things.
Now we would say hashtag no filter, I think, right?
Yeah, exactly.
And
in those days, it was I just don't want to be on record. The show was fine.
And I want to thank Saul and Stephanie for lending us really beautiful works for diverse networks. Saul has lent us some really personal correspondences with Ray Johnson. My favorite work is "Who's Your Favorite Artist?" and it's an anagram. So it's like "Who's Your Favorite" is like one, "Who'ser" is like one word, and it's really fun and animated to look at, and has a Motoko on it that was discussed in the film. And then Stephanie lent us work from the Vissari project, and I wanted to ask you about one of the pieces specifically. It's this George Brett piece. Mm-hmm. And he refers to Ray Johnson. There's a line, a typewritten line that says he calls Ray Johnson the ding dong daddy of male art. And I wanted to ask you what you think about that artist nod.
I think all of us can agree that he most certainly is the ding dong daddy of male art. Yeah, I think that, when Brett's writing this letter, he's, so the letter that he's writing to the person that's handling the Artmobile. And he's giving her this list of all of the people that he's loaning these artworks out to. So I think that it's perfect that he would refer to him as that, because I think it's evident that he kind of founded this idea and really continued to propel it onward and let it kind of create a life of its own. So I think that was a very astute observation of Ray Johnson, for sure.
And Saul, do you feel like you knew the real Ray, like the documentary kind of sets it up in the beginning, like that no one knew him?
No, I mean, I I knew two Rays. One was a semi-public one, which was from the correspondence school, and the other Ray was somebody who I knew through mutual friends, and to a certain degree, the two shouldn't be confused. The correspondence school Ray was the prankster Ray. The other Ray was a very serious Ray. In a sort of ironic way, he was a very serious Ray, and he was somebody who was, at least in terms of what I know of him, antithetical to the prankster Ray. So, and and one of the things I actually wanted to say when Stephanie brought up Brecht and so on, that one has to remember that while the correspondence school gets credit for being the inventor of mail art, there were lots of circles of mail art. There were lots of art exchanges going on. There were, the Fluxus artists were doing exchanges. There were all sorts of networks in which people were forwarding artworks to people and asking that person to forward an artwork to the next person on the list and things like that. So the whole idea of using the mail system as a delivery system or an art distribution system was quite active in the 60s.
Yeah, I often feel that the movement kind of mutates and shifts, like even every 10 years or so. I see that artists have continued to send things through the mail during different periods.
Yeah. There's, and I have it, I have it somewhat in my archive, though he's not considered a mail artist, I have a hell of a lot of mail works by James Lee Byers that came in the mail, or I have stuff from Joseph Beuys that came in the mail.
Yeah.
It was a way of, as I had said earlier, a way of exchanging things and networking and keeping things non-commercial.
Yeah. I have a question for Stephanie that George Fishman, who's one of our favorite local people, he posted, and it goes along with my second question for Stephanie is, could you speak more about the Vissari project and further connections to the themes in the film? And I also want to ask you, Stephanie, what's it like managing an archive?
Okay. 2 questions. I get 2 questions too.
Yeah.
So let's see. Speak more about the Vissari project. So for those that don't know, the Vissari project is an archive, a living archive that we have at the Miami-Dade Public Library, based over in Main Library. And everyone that wants to come and take a visit is always welcome. We're open 6 days a week. And what we do is we collect material on the visual arts in South Florida. So we don't really collect art. In the cases of mail art, we do, because it was treated like correspondence. But we're talking about paintings and large things. We don't collect those, but we do collect the ephemera. We collect the things that maybe you wouldn't have necessarily thought were as important, those invitations, those press releases, the things that really end up giving us a full understanding and scope of what's happening in our community. And so we've been collecting and been active for 20 years now, and have material going back all the way to the Workers' Progress Administration and like 1930s. So we have a really nice, robust collection of material related to the arts in Miami. And so as far as the way that it connects with the themes in the film, I mean, I would say that, and thank you to Danielle for giving a link on the chat. I would say that in the essence of learning the personalities of artists and understanding the whys and the what fors and the wheres, I think the Vissari project really gives you a really good sense of that, especially for the artists that have donated materials to the collection. We have over 220 collections and constantly growing, constantly processing. And so as far as what it's like to manage an archive, I am a librarian and an archivist. So I got I did my schooling on both sides. Archives are great. They're primary resources. So they're original objects, they're original materials, which makes it feel really special and also very unique. And to kind of speak to that first question you had, Laura, before the film about correspondence, we have mountains of correspondence. I mean, not necessarily mail art, but these exchanges that we kind of don't get to see anymore between Barbara Young, who was an instrumental figure in the permanent art collection that we have at the library, which is extensive and we've had since the 70s, as well as, which I'll tell you about later, but the Artmobile and this amazing traveling art space that the library had from the 70s into the early 90s. So it's pretty awesome.
Yeah, I want to shout out to the Vissari project because Stephanie had such a wonderful experience there. And when you curate, sometimes the research in the exhibition becomes invisible labor in the show. It's like research is something that isn't necessarily embraced or that you're told to do, but I had a wonderful time at the Vissari project. I didn't want to leave. And I only went through one archive box or maybe 1.5. We didn't get very far. And there was so much more information about local artists and how they lived their lives. And that direct correspondence gives you a window into process. And I would definitely encourage everyone in Miami to go visit the Vissari project and spend some time going through whether it's an artist that you're researching or a movement. And I didn't know anything about the Artmobile until I went to the Vissari project. So I was completely amazed that there was a branch of the public library that gave out information about really important projects. I knew about the Christo and Jean-Claude's Islands, and I knew that project happened in Miami, but I didn't know that that the library produced a brochure that was very informative, that let the public know what this work is about. And I think that archives and libraries serve a really important educational role in really exposing people to installation art and environmental art specifically, work that's not necessarily mainstream. And then also, going back to Saul, you have an archive and it's a very personal one. And I want to ask you, how do your letters and New York Correspondence School invitations add to your collection? How do they enrich your collection?
Well, the archive is like the biography of the collection, in a sense. It's the backstory. In some cases, the backstory. In some cases, it fills the gaps in the collection. We would talk, once again, during the break, we were talking, I've got a curator's collection, a critic's collection. It has some very well-known people in it and a lot of people who came and went. And some of that in terms of the people who are lesser known, the material in the archive makes their presence more important. Right? One forgets that the reason they're a famous artist is because there are a lot of artists who aren't famous who supported their work, who pushed forward their ideas, got on the bandwagon and made them important art-wise. We know there's very few important artists who had no followers. Right? They're important only because they're influential.
Yeah.
And sometimes to look at a collection of those influences, and the archive helps. My archive, in the case of my archive, supplies a context for people who you've never heard of and go, why haven't I ever heard of this person? Or I now understand why I've never heard of this person.
It's like a really interesting social study of art.
Yeah, it's sociology. It's the sociology of art.
So we have a new question in the chat from Clarissa, who asks, Stephanie, do you have a favorite piece in the Vissari project?
Yeah, it's super weird though, but yes, I do have a favorite piece. In the 90s, we had a Cuban museum that was on the beach. It has, won't get into it, but had a very controversial past. And there was even a pipe bomb that happened in front of the building when there was some arguments as to whether Cuban artists from Cuba should be showing in the United States, of course, embargo and all of that. And so, strangest thing to have, but we have it, is when the bomb went off, there were pieces that were scattered. I have the handle from the door, which is sort of this yeah. So of course I couldn't pick like a cute thing. It had to be a door that got the door handle that got blown off of a museum. But yeah, that's my piece.
So that definitely positions you as an advocate right there. Like you yeah.
Right. Yeah. Yes, absolutely. Yeah, I wanted to say, Saul, I fully agree with you as far as with talking about how an archive is the context of art. That is actually exactly how I would explain it when we would talk about the library's permanent art collection and how the Vissari complements it. And it's sort of, well, we don't collect art, but we do collect the context of art. And if I didn't mention it, the Vissari is a living archive, so it means that artists can continually donate items to the Vissari that they feel should be in the collection. And so that way, 30 years from now, which I know none of us are thinking about that, we'll have these pieces and people can come back and kind of see what we were doing during this time. Yeah. Just wanted to add that.
Very, super fascinating. I think one of the things, the impetus for me in putting together this show is that I love ephemera and I love marginalia. And whenever I say that word, people ask me what it means. It literally means like in the margins. But there's been like marginalia like throughout history. And I'm interested in Pope L's marginalia, who's a contemporary artist, but he's done a lot of things in the margins about race and society and done like airplane drawings and all kinds of things. And I often think that these are the thoughts that we're left with, and that these things in the margins are actually really monumental, even though they take on a slight form. And that's why I like to nerd out on some of this correspondence art. And I think it's really important to like take a deep dive into what people are thinking about. And I have another question for you, Stephanie, about the Artmobile for those people who do not know it, because I didn't know about it. Like we have a work in the show from the Wolfson Archive that documents the Artmobile. I really wanted to represent the bus somehow, like the van somehow, like what it looked like.
Yeah.
And Barbara, who is then Barbara Edwards, before she was married to Robert Huff, which is a well-known artist in this community that passed away. She was talking about Jim Dine and Rauschenberg and major artists at the time who were in that Artmobile. And like, how do you think of that Artmobile then, and how do you feel it maybe shaped a little bit of Miami's history?
The beauty of Barbara Young and just like the energy behind the Artmobile, which was, let me make sure I get my notes right. It was in 1976 that the Artmobile gets purchased through a relationship with Southeast Bank. So they basically pitched this idea. Southeast Bank says, sure, we'll front the money to get this truck that we're going to makeshift and install an AC and be able to make it so that we can make it a gallery space inside. And Southeast Bank is going to help have a New York artist, Lowell Nesbitt, create the mural on the outside. And they start doing these incredible shows. And what they were doing was they were sort of trying to let the artists have a moment in Miami, and then in a lot of cases, the shows were happening maybe a year later in like a reflective sort of way. So Rauschenberg in 1972 does a project with the Sunday insert of the Miami Herald called Tropic Magazine, and he creates like an actual artwork. He creates like an artwork that's like the largest screen print ever created in a mass-produced machine that was also, creating the newspapers, and ends up getting distributed. Hundreds of thousands of them end up being distributed throughout the community, and kind of similar to what we do with the newspaper when we're done with it. Tons of people threw them away in the garbage. and then of course, Rauschenberg signs 100 of them and randomly gives them to folks, to the point where when you see the show the next year, not only are we talking about that piece that he did, but she's also showing documentation of, that one guy that comes out of his house and somebody's like presenting this great piece by Rauschenberg signed, and the guy doesn't have a shirt on. He has no idea what's going on. And it's sort of, and it's this personification of how I think the Artmobile really helped in the same way that these artists were sort of coming in and making these influential pieces without folks really knowing that they were anybody. And then presenting them again. And so the Artmobile was running for 17 years until unfortunately it was damaged during Hurricane Andrew in 93. And goes to schools and goes to, kind of more rural areas in Miami and showing folks the incredible art collection that we had in the library, and also these artists that otherwise they would have probably never really been exposed to. And so, I'd like to think that in grand gestures, there's future artists kind of witnessing this, but in the beauty of what art is, I think it was like the everyday person that was getting to see this and being exposed to it. And I'd like to think that it made their life just a little bit more interesting, because this far out, truck shows up. And I want to find a picture so that I can kind of put it in the chat. But, and get to go into this space, or these kids are going into this building, into this object and seeing artworks. Cristo was a great piece that was shown. And yeah, so, I think, how did it shape local Miami art history? I think that in the same vein as happenings being so important and sort of that spontaneity, I think it really lended itself in that way. And I think that, a lot of us talk about how we want the Artmobile back. But if not, then I think that the library is continuing to do a great job putting exhibitions together in our 50 branches, in all of our larger size libraries. And we want to keep being part of the art community. So
I have one last question as a wrap-up question from Ruben. And if you can both just shout out a little bit about what you're up to right now or doing next. He asks both of you, what shape does correspondence art take in the future? What does an archive of 2020 look like? Open to your interpretation.
The archivist we spoke about this actually once again during the break, during the film. I was pointing out the fact that increasingly among institutions that collect archives and so on and so forth, they see a plethora of material literally disappearing by the night, in terms of from the 90s on, in that everything goes digital. People don't archive their emails. Important conversations and correspondence disappears. Similarly, websites disappear that carry an incredible amount of information. There is nobody archiving gallery websites, and galleries come into being, go out of being, so on and so forth. And with that, an incredible amount of history disappears. The possibility is what was the year that Ruben asked about?
2020. The pandemic.
2020. 2020 archives look like people desperately collecting materials pre-80s. Because after that, there's not a hell of a lot of material, because artists don't realize that they generate in their studios not only their own work, but a history of that work. Mm. And the history is ephemeral and fragile and intimate and disappears like dust if somebody doesn't actually pay attention.
Yes, I agree with you. So I agree.
I'm an advocate for you.
I'm all for it. Yeah, you definitely, it's interesting. I mean, with all things, because I don't just manage the Vissari project. We also handle like all Florida history at the library. And so we have, let's just talk yellow pages. Let's talk about phone books that were like this, like crazy thick at one point. And now it doesn't exist. I mean, like if it does, it's this tiny thing, like who's listed anymore? And so I think when it comes to like that digital lean that we lean so hard on it, the ephemeral is starting to disappear a little bit. But I would say, yeah, I would agree that the archive of 2020, I think that a lot of it's media based. I think you have to be really careful about media in general. Nothing lasts forever for sure, but this piece of paper is going to last longer than this phone. So, so I think that there needs to be thoughtfulness, really, about the things that we hold precious and how we want to keep them. And putting it on a CD is just not going to be enough.
Yeah. Well, actually, you and I can get into a whole conversation about the fragility of media, and that, the ever-changing formats, and archiving those, and having the equipment to be able to recall what's up.
Yeah.
From cartridges, from floppy disks to cartridges to.
Well, you and me are going to do a whole other episode where we're just talking about digital preservation.
We can just talk about obsolete media.
Absolutely. Yeah. So, I think the short answer is that the future of archives is volatile to an extent, but I think that we need to just really think about what we want to keep and be thoughtful about it. So, another question. Digital archives are
So yeah, like if we should wrap it up in a few words. What are you both up to next?
I've used my COVID period to write a number of homeless essays, which deal with sort of revising certain aspects of art history. So I've reintroduced Daumier and Delacroix as modernists. I've dealt with, I wrote an essay about how the famous diagram that was used for the Cubism and abstract art show by Alfred Barr excludes artists who were already engaged in machine art, producing light machines and sound works and things like that. And I just finished a short history of the political culture, Black political culture for white people. So that's how I spend my time.
Sounds good. What am I working on right now? Always many things simultaneously. But Vissari Project also loaned out some items for recently to FIU for an exhibition they're having in June on the history of Coconut Grove and the art community and how it evolved. And also Coral Gables Museum is doing an exhibition called Matter of Time on the AIDS pandemic, and features a lot of artists that were alive during that time. And so we learned some items out for that. So I think there's going to be some presentation in June. So that's the sort of thing that I'm thinking ahead for. But in the meantime, research visits and all of that fun stuff. So come visit me. Come and hang out.
Well, very good things. I encourage the audience to look into the Vissari project and go visit Stephanie, as well as look at Critical Practices Incorporated and check out what Saul's doing and all of the virtual shows that he's doing right now. And a shout out to Ulay Arts and coming to visit us and see diverse networks and take a deep dive into Saul and Stephanie's contributions, as well as 9 artists who made contemporary site-specific works who corresponded during the pandemic. One of the joys of the show was pairing artists and having artists choose other artists to directly correspond with in the mail, and then to also do larger projects. And it's up through July 4th. So come visit, schedule a visit. Thank you, Saul and Stephanie, so much for this lively conversation and everyone that tuned in.
Oh, thank you.
This is great fun.
Yeah.
Let's do this again. Yeah.
Please.
Definitely.
Let's do some archive visits.
We'll do